My name is Lizzie, and for as long as I can remember, my father Dan was the man I admired most in the world. He wasn't just a parent in the way most people describe their fathers, distant, strict, or unreachable. No, he was my best friend, my hero, the one person I felt I could tell anything without fear of judgment. Growing up, people often said I looked like him, the same dark eyes that seemed to read people's hearts, the same smile that lit up rooms. I wore that resemblance like a crown because it meant I was a part of him, connected in a way words could never fully capture. My mother, Frida, used to joke that I was Daddy's shadow, and in truth, I was. Wherever he went, I wanted to follow. Whatever he did, I wanted to learn. He carried the air of a man who could fix any problem, and to a little girl like me, that made him invincible. As I grew older, our bond only deepened. Unlike many teenagers who drift away from their parents, I leaned into him more. He was the first person I called when I didn't get into the college I had hoped for, and the first to celebrate when I landed my scholarship at another school. He was there in the audience during my high school debate competitions, clapping the loudest, his eyes shining with pride. To me, he was proof that good men existed in a world where so many fathers abandoned their families. But it wasn't just about the big moments. It was the small things that made him special. He made Saturday mornings sacred, cooking pancakes while whistling old jazz tunes. He never forgot the names of my friends, and he treated them with the same warmth he gave me. When I went through my first heartbreak at 19, he sat by my side for hours, listening, reminding me that love could be painful, but it should never be demeaning. That night, I remember thinking, if I ever marry, I hope I find a man as loyal and kind as my father. I say all this because you need to understand how high I placed him on a pedestal. My father wasn't just my parent. He was the blueprint of trust and goodness in my life. Which is why, when things began to shift, I struggled to accept it. The shift didn't happen overnight. At first, it was subtle, little cracks in the glass that I dismissed as stress or the weight of his business. My father was a successful entrepreneur, running a construction firm that employed dozens of people. It was natural, I thought, for him to be exhausted or distracted sometimes. But then came the late nights. He started coming home hours later than usual, offering vague explanations that never matched his routine. Had to check on a site, he would say, brushing past me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Or, a client kept me longer than expected. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that he was still the same man I had always known. After all, why would he lie to me? Why would he lie to Mom? But doubt has a way of growing roots. There was one evening I'll never forget. Mom had cooked his favorite meal, roasted chicken with spiced rice, and she asked me to call him to the table. I went to his study, expecting to find him on the phone or reading documents. Instead, I found him staring blankly at his computer screen, his shoulders slumped, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. When I entered, he startled, quickly locking his phone and forcing a smile. "You okay, Dad?" I asked, frowning. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, a little too quickly. "Just tired. Let's eat." At the table, he laughed at Mom's jokes and complimented the meal, but I couldn't shake the image of his startled expression. It was the look of a man caught doing something he shouldn't. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was simply stressed. Maybe his business was falling apart and he didn't want us to worry. But deep down, a tiny voice whispered a possibility I refused to entertain. What if my father was hiding something far worse? The months that followed only fueled my unease. He began to travel more, claiming out-of-town meetings. He guarded his phone like it was a treasure chest, always face down, always with him, even when he stepped into the bathroom. The man who once shared everything with me, his plans, his dreams, his struggles, was now cloaked in secrecy. And yet, every time he looked at me with those familiar eyes, every time he hugged me and said he loved me, I wanted to erase my suspicions. This was my father. The man who carried me on his shoulders at the park, who taught me how to drive, who cheered the loudest when I graduated. He couldn't possibly betray us. But as much as I tried to hold on to the image of him I had always known, I couldn't deny the distance that was forming between us. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now felt forced. Moments of laughter were fewer, and when I caught him lost in thought, there was a heaviness about him that frightened me. One night, lying awake in my bed, I whispered to myself, "Something has shifted between us. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it. And I'm terrified to find out the truth." At the time, I had no idea just how right I was. My father would soon do something that would not only confirm my worst fears, but also change the way I looked at him forever. Our clean, beautiful relationship, the bond one once thought unbreakable, was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. And nothing would ever be the same again. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build, but only moments to break. For 25 years, I trusted my father without question. But as the weeks turned into months, the cracks in our once perfect bond began to widen until I could no longer pretend they didn't exist. The first real fracture came on a rainy Thursday evening. I had come home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise my parents with dessert from a new bakery downtown. Mom was in the kitchen humming softly, her hands busy with vegetables, but Dad was nowhere in sight. He said he was caught up at work, Mom explained when I asked. Should be home soon. Something about her casual tone unsettled me. She didn't suspect anything, and part of me envied her trust. But when I carried the boxes of pastries upstairs, I noticed the faint glow of light under the door of Dad's study. Curious, I pushed it open quietly and froze. There he was, leaning back in his chair, his face lit up by his phone screen. He was smiling. Not the tired smile he offered us at dinner, but the kind of smile that belonged to a man in love. He was typing quickly, pausing only to read whatever appeared on the screen. I stepped back before he saw me, my heart pounding. I wanted to tell myself he was just texting a colleague, maybe sharing a joke with an old friend. But deep down I knew. I had never seen him smile like that except with Mom, at least, not before now. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face bathed in the glow of that screen. It wasn't the image of a father lost in work. It was the image of a man keeping a secret. Over the next few weeks, the signs multiplied. Dad began receiving calls late into the night. Sometimes he'd step outside to take them, pacing the driveway with hushed tones. When I asked about it, he brushed me off. "Business never sleeps, sweetheart," he said with a grin that felt rehearsed. But the truth was in the details, the way his eyes darted away from mine, the way he cleared his throat as though to erase the guilt in his voice. One Saturday morning, I walked into the living room and found Mom sitting with his phone in her hand. She was frowning, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked cautiously. She quickly set the phone down. "Nothing. Just checking the time." But I wasn't convinced. I wanted to press further, but I didn't. Maybe she already knew something. Or maybe, like me, she sensed something was wrong but wasn't ready to face it. The turning point came one evening when I drove past a popular cafe after work. Through the glass window, I saw him. My father. He was sitting at a corner table, leaning forward, his face animated with warmth. Opposite him sat a woman I recognized instantly, Clara, my closest friend since childhood. My world tilted. They weren't holding hands, but their closeness screamed intimacy. Clara's laughter rang out as she brushed her hair behind her ear, her gaze fixed on him with a softness I had never noticed before. And Dad, my father, looked at her with the same tenderness he once reserved for Mom. I pulled over, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My chest tightened as though the air had been sucked out of the world. This wasn't just any woman. This was Clara, the girl who had spent countless nights in my room, the friend who had been like a sister to me. I wanted to storm inside, to demand answers, but I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, frozen in disbelief. I stayed there until they stood, until I saw him rest his hand lightly on her back as they walked out together, oblivious to the storm unraveling inside me. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Betrayal had never felt so sharp. It wasn't just about Mom, it was about me, about our family, about everything he had ever taught me about loyalty and love. The next morning, I avoided him. When he greeted me with his usual cheer, I forced a smile and left quickly. I couldn't look at him without seeing Clara's face beside his. I couldn't hear his voice without hearing the laughter they had shared in that cafe. Days passed in a blur. Clara stopped answering my calls, and when I finally cornered her at her apartment, she burst into tears. "Lizzie, I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your dad, he was just there for me when I needed someone." And then, her words dissolved into sobs. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath me. My best friend. My father. The two people I trusted most in the world. When I left her apartment, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing could ever be the same again. But even then, I hadn't realized how deep the betrayal would go. I thought maybe it was a momentary weakness, a mistake they would regret. I was wrong. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was happening often, over and over again. And as much as I wanted to shut my eyes and pretend it wasn't real, the truth kept surfacing in ways I couldn't ignore. His frequent absences, the lies that piled on top of each other, the guilty silence that filled the spaces between us. The cracks in the glass had shattered into pieces, and I was standing in the middle of it, bleeding from every edge. The day I discovered the full weight of my father's betrayal began like any other. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, the smell of Mom's coffee brewing downstairs filling the air. For a brief moment, I almost convinced myself life was normal again. But that illusion shattered the moment I heard his phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. Dad was still upstairs getting ready, and Mom had stepped out to buy groceries. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that. But curiosity is a cruel master when your heart is already drowning in suspicion. The phone buzzed again, flashing a name across the screen that made my stomach drop. Clara. I stared at it, frozen, as though the name itself had burned me. When the screen dimmed, I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. Against my better judgment, I opened the message thread. There it was, undeniable. Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. Another message followed. When can I see you again? And then his reply, my father's words, written with the tenderness he used to shower on Mom. Tonight. Same place. Same time. I dropped the phone as though it were on fire, my chest constricting until I could hardly breathe. Tears blurred my vision, but no amount of crying could erase the words seared into my memory. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a single lapse in judgment. It was a relationship. A repeated, ongoing affair. With my best friend. I ran to my room, closed the door, and let the sobs escape. Every memory of Clara, the sleepovers, the whispered secrets, the promises of friendship forever collided violently with the image of her entwined with my father. How could she? How could he? That evening, I followed him. It wasn't planned. I just knew I couldn't stay in the house, pretending everything was normal while those messages echoed in my head. When he grabbed his keys and told Mom he had business to handle, I waited a few minutes before slipping out after him. The city lights blurred as I trailed his car, my grip tight on the steering wheel, my heart racing with each turn he took. Finally, he pulled up outside a quiet motel tucked away on the edge of town. My hands went cold. I watched as he parked, glanced around nervously, and stepped inside. Minutes later, Clara arrived. I recognized her instantly. Even under the hood of her jacket, I knew her gait, her posture. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight into the building, her body language screaming familiarity. It was real. I sat there in my car, shaking, my nails digging into my palms. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Should I storm inside? Should I record this? Should I call Mom? But all I could do was sit and cry, because the truth had finally become undeniable. My father wasn't the man I thought he was. And Clara wasn't the friend I believed she was. When he came home that night, I couldn't look at him. He kissed Mom's cheek, asked about her day, and laughed at something she said as though nothing had happened. The performance was flawless, but to me, every smile was a lie, every word a blade cutting deeper into my heart. The next few weeks were torture. I avoided both of them. Clara stopped reaching out, probably drowning in guilt, while Dad carried on as though everything was normal. But behind the facade, I saw the truth. The late-night calls, the unexplained absences, the way his eyes softened when he glanced at his phone. And the worst part? He couldn't stop. It wasn't a fling he could walk away from. It was happening often, over and over again, until it became a rhythm he couldn't control. The more I saw it, the more I realized he wasn't just betraying Mom, he was betraying me. Every value he had instilled in me, honesty, loyalty, integrity, crumbled under the weight of his actions. One evening, I confronted Clara. She had been avoiding me for weeks, but I showed up at her apartment unannounced. She opened the door, her eyes swollen from crying. "Lizzie," she whispered, her voice breaking. I pushed past her into the room. "How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. She sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "Months," she admitted through tears. "It just happened. I didn't plan it. He was there, and he listened when I felt alone, and—" "Stop." I raised my hand, my whole body shaking. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You were my best friend. He's my father. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her sobs filled the silence, but they did nothing to soothe the fury burning in my chest. I wanted to hate her completely, but a part of me still mourned the girl who had once been like a sister to me. When I left her apartment that night, I felt a strange mix of grief and clarity. My father wasn't just cheating, he was choosing. Choosing Clara. Choosing betrayal. Choosing to shatter our family again and again with every secret meeting. And I couldn't stay silent any longer. The next day, I stood outside his study, listening to the sound of his voice through the door. He was on the phone, his tone soft and tender, the same way it had been with Clara at the cafe. "Soon," he whispered. "I'll make time. You mean too much to me." I pushed the door open. He spun around, startled, his phone still pressed to his ear. The moment our eyes met, his face drained of color. "Lizzie," he began, but I held up my hand. "I know," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. His phone slipped from his hand onto the desk. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, not fear of losing Mom, but fear of losing me. And in that moment, I realized something that broke me all over again. No matter how many times he told me he loved me, no matter how much he claimed to care, our relationship would never be the same. Because my father had done something that changed us forever. The night I confronted my father will be etched into my memory forever, not because it offered closure, but because it marked the point of no return. He stood frozen behind his desk, the phone lying uselessly on the table between us. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence thick enough to suffocate. I could see a dozen emotions flickering across his face, guilt, fear, shame, but also defiance. Finally, he spoke. "Lizzie, let me explain." "Explain?" My voice cracked as I stepped closer. "Explain how you've been lying to Mom for months? Explain how you've been sneaking around with Clara of all people? My best friend, Dad. The girl who grew up in this house like family. How do you explain that?" He ran a hand across his face, his shoulders sagging. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't plan it. Don't." My voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't insult me by pretending it just happened. I've seen the messages. I followed you. I know it wasn't a mistake. It's been happening over and over again. And you didn't stop. The weight of my words seemed to crush him. He sank into his chair, his hands trembling as he rubbed his temples. For the first time, my invincible father looked small, broken. I love your mother, he whispered, almost to himself. I never wanted to hurt her. But with Clara, I don't know, Lizzie. She made me feel alive? I snapped. Wanted? Excited? Do you hear yourself? You threw away everything we had as a family for a cheap thrill. You betrayed Mom, but you also betrayed me. Do you understand that? You were the man I trusted more than anyone, and now I can't even look at you without feeling sick. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He tried to stand, reaching for me, but I stepped back. The distance between us felt like an ocean. Lizzie, please, he said, his voice breaking. You're my daughter. I never meant for you to get hurt in this. I lost control. I didn't know how to stop. And there it was, the truth. He couldn't control it. It wasn't a one-time lapse. It had become a pattern, an addiction, a selfish choice he repeated without thinking of the consequences. I shook my head slowly. You always told me a man's character is defined by the choices he makes when no one is watching. And now? Now I see the real you. And I don't know if I can ever respect you again. His face crumpled, and for a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But the anger inside me burned hotter than any sympathy. That night, I didn't tell Mom. Not yet. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to scream the truth to her, to free her from the lies she was unknowingly living in. But I couldn't. Not when I saw the way she looked at him, the way she believed in his every word. She was still in love with the man I used to know, the man who had been her partner for decades. Shattering that illusion would destroy her, and I wasn't ready to be the one holding the hammer. Instead, I carried the burden alone. Every dinner became a performance. I sat across from him, pretending not to see the guilt in his eyes. I listened to Mom laugh at his jokes, oblivious to the cracks forming in her marriage. And I hated him for putting me in this position, for making me his unwilling accomplice, for dragging me into a secret that poisoned every breath I took. Clara vanished from my life entirely. She stopped answering calls, stopped coming by, stopped being the friend she once was. Sometimes, I wondered if she ended things with him too, or if they continued in shadows I no longer wanted to chase. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Even if it ended, the betrayal remained. Weeks turned into months, and the distance between my father and me grew impossible to ignore. He tried, in small ways, to mend it. He'd ask about my day, offer to take me out for coffee, remind me that he loved me. But I couldn't hear those words without remembering the ones he wrote to Clara, "You mean too much to me." And then one evening it all came to a head. Mom had cooked a beautiful dinner, candles lit, soft music playing in the background. She thought she was surprising Dad, but in reality, she was the one living in the surprise. Halfway through the meal, she excused herself to take a phone call, leaving us alone at the table. He looked at me then, his fork frozen midway to his mouth. "Lizzie," he said quietly, "I need you to forgive me. I don't want to lose you." I stared at him, my chest tight with unspoken words. Finally, I whispered, "You already lost me, Dad. The moment you chose her, you lost me." His face twisted in pain, and when Mom returned, he forced a smile and picked up the conversation as though nothing had been said. But I knew, and he knew, that our relationship was beyond repair. I never told Mom. Some secrets, once revealed, are too heavy to carry, and I couldn't bear to watch her heart break the way mine had. Maybe one day I will. Maybe the truth will come out in its own time. But for now, I live with the silence, with the knowledge that the man I once adored is not the man I thought he was. And as for me, I'm left with the shards of a bond one once believed unbreakable. When I look at him now, I don't see the hero of my childhood. I see a man who failed his wife, failed his daughter, failed himself. And though he still says, "I love you" every night, I can't say it back without tasting the bitterness of betrayal on my tongue. Because my father did something that changed our relationship forever. And there's no going back.